This is part 53, and in this part we start discussing chapter 9 of the Indian Penal Code, dealing with offences by or relating to public servant. And in order to understand this, we shall be dealing right from section 161 up to section 170 of the Indian Penal Code. Before we start with this, as this is a topic which deals with public servant, who is public servant? And in order to understand who is public servant, we will have reference back to section 21, namely as the chapter on general explanations. And if you go through 12 categories which are enumerated as far as section 21 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned, then such a person is what is known as a public servant. As in the past I had requested you to keep a book of Bare Act with you. I don't think it's necessary for me to read all 12 categories which are enumerated, and the categories are self-explanatory. So if you just go through the categories which are enumerated, it is possible for you to understand who is public servant as far as section 21 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. And when you go through the two, along with that you go through the three explanations as far as
this is concerned, that serve the purpose from the point of view of understanding who is public servant. Now with this, now as we start reading right from section 161 onwards, now as you start reading the same, you will come to know right from section 161 up to section 165A are the sections which are deleted because they, now you should not read those sections, they are omitted. Because of what? The sections are omitted because of the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988. Prior to Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988, public servants were governed by these sections, or these were the offences which, as we have dealt with, by or relating to public servants. But now, because of the inclusion of all those offences as far as Prevention of Corruption Act of 1988 is concerned, when we start reading right from section 161 onward, it's not necessary for us to refer to right from section 161 up to 165A of the Indian Penal Code. With this, now we start discussing section 166, which deals with public servant disobeying law with intent to cause injury to any person. And it says, whoever being a public servant knowingly disobeys any direction of the law as to the way in which he is to conduct himself as such public servant, intending to cause or knowing it to be likely that he will by such disobedience cause injury to any person, shall be punished with simple imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine, or with both. So that is as far as section 166 is concerned. Section 167 deals with public servant framing incorrect document with intent to cause injury. And then it says, whoever being a public servant and being as such public servant charged with the preparation or translation of any document or electronic record, frames, prepares or translates that document or electronic record in a manner which he knows or believes to be incorrect, intending thereby to cause or knowing it to be likely that he will thereby cause injury to any person, shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 3 years, or with fine, or with both. Section 168, public servant unlawfully engaging in any trade, and says, whoever being a public servant and being legally bound as such public servant not to engage in trade, engages in trade, shall be punished with simple imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine, or with both. Section 169, public servant unlawfully buying or bidding for property. And it says, whoever, being a public servant and being legally bound as such public servant not to purchase or to bid for certain property, purchases or bids for that property either in his own name or in the name of another or jointly or in shares with others shall be punished with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 2 years or with fine or with both, and the property if purchased shall be confiscated. Now if you remember, when we were dealing with forfeiture of the property, we learned that now there is this provision in applicable, like section 126, section 127, and this is section 169. Now this has got reference to the chapter namely on punishment, where we had dealt with different theories of various kinds of punishment and different kinds of punishment. At the time of dealing with kinds of punishment, I had drawn your attention to this. With this now, the section 170 deals with personating a public servant, and it says, whoever pretends to hold any particular office as a public servant, knowing that he does not hold such office, or falsely personates any other person holding such office, and in such assumed character does or attempts to does any act under color of such office, shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 1 year or with fine or with both. With this now, the last section, namely section 171, deals with wearing garb or carrying token used by public servant with fraudulent intent. And it says, whoever not belonging to a certain class of public servants wears any garb or carries any token resembling any garb or token used by that class of public servants with the intention that it may be believed, or with the knowledge that it is likely to be believed that he belongs to that class of public servant, shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 3 years, or with fine which may extend to 200 rupees, or with both. So these are right from section 161 up to section 171 is the chapter which deals with offences by or relating to public servant. With this now, we start discussing chapter 9A, capital A, dealing with offences relating to elections, and then section 171A, where you come across various terms which are defined by this section. First of all, it says candidate electoral right defined, and it says, for the purposes of the chapter, small a, section 170, in order to know the offences relating to election, you have to start right from section 171 capital A up to section 171 capital I. These are the various offences relating to election. And then as we have started discussing section 171 capital A, where A, small a, defines candidate, and it says candidate means a person who has been nominated as a candidate at any election. Small b, electoral right means the right of a person to stand or not to stand as, or to withdraw from being a candidate, or to vote or refrain from voting at an election. Section 171b defines bribery, and it says whoever gives a gratification to any person with the object of inducing him or any other person to exercise any electoral right, or of rewarding any person for having exercised any such right, or accepts either for himself or for any other person any gratification as a reward for exercising any such right, or for inducing or attempting to induce any other person to exercise any such right, commits the offence of bribery, provided that a declaration of a public policy or a promise of a public action shall not be an offence under this section. Subclause 2 says, a person who offers or agrees to give or offers or attempts to procure a gratification shall be deemed to give a gratification. Subclause 3, a person who obtains or agrees to accept or attempts to obtain a gratification shall be deemed to accept a gratification, and a person who accepts a gratification as a motive for doing what he does not intend to do, or as a reward for doing what he has not done, shall be deemed to have accepted the gratification as a reward. Section 171, capital C, undue influence at election. Subclause 1 says, whoever voluntarily interferes or attempts to interfere with the free exercise of any electoral right commits the offence of undue influence at an election. 2. Without prejudice to the generality of the provisions of subsection 1, whoever threatens any candidate or voter or any person in whom a candidate or voter is interested with injury of any kind, or induces or attempts to induce a candidate or voter to believe that he or any person to whom he is interested will become or will be rendered an object of divine displeasure or spiritual censure, shall be deemed to interfere with the free exercise of the electoral right of such candidate or voter within the meaning of subsection 1. Subsection 3. A declaration of public policy or a promise of public action or the mere exercise of the legal right without intent to interfere with an electoral right shall not be deemed to be interference within the meaning of this section. Section 171D, personation at election, and says, whoever at an election applies for a voting paper or votes in name of any other person, whether living or dead, or in a fictitious name, or who, having voted once at such election, applies at the same election for a voting paper in his own name, and whoever procures or attempts to procure the voting by any person in any such way commits the offence of personation at an election, provided that nothing in this section shall apply to a person who has been authorized to vote as proxy for an electoral under any law for the timing in force insofar as he votes as a proxy for such electoral. Section 171, capital E, punishment for bribery. It says, whoever commits the offence of bribery shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine, or with both, provided that bribery by treating shall be punished with fine only. Explanation says, treating means that form of bribery where the gratification consists in food, drink, entertainment, or provision. Section 171, capital F, punishment for undue influence or personation at an election. Whoever commits the offence of undue influence or personation at an election shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine, or with both. Section 171, capital G, false statement in connection with an election. It says, whoever, with intent to affect the result of an election, makes or publishes any statement purporting to be a statement of fact which is false, and which he either knows or believes to be false, or does not believe it to be true, in relation to the personal character or conduct of any candidate, shall be punished with fine. Section 171, capital H, illegal payment in connection with an election. It says, whoever, without the general or special authority in writing of a candidate, incurs or authorizes expenses on account of the holding of any public meeting, or upon any advertisement circular or publication or in any other way whatsoever for the purpose of promoting or procuring the election of such candidate shall be punished with fine which may extend to 500 rupees, provided that if any person having incurred any such expenses not exceeding the amount of 10 rupees without authority obtains within 10 days from the date on which such expenses were incurred the approval in writing of the candidate, he shall be deemed to have incurred such expenses with the authority of the candidate. And the last section, namely section 171 capital I, deals with failure to keep election accounts and says, whoever being required by any law for the time being enforced or any rule having the force of law to keep accounts of expenses incurred at or in connection with an election fails to keep such accounts shall be punished with fine which may extend to 500 rupees. With this now, we want to start discussion regarding the topic, namely chapter 10, which deals with contempt of lawful authority of a public servant, where we shall be dealing right from section 172 up to section 190 of the Indian Penal Code, with which we will continue our discussion in the next part.